In today's Neville Goddard conversation, we discuss relating with others from the premise of this quote here. He says, "You do not have to be concerned about influencing others, as they are not the cause. Your imaginal act is. Everyone is yourself pushed out, so when you imagine, you are influencing yourself." So the way I relate to this is, anyone within my awareness now, in this five-sensory experience, is playing out inner assumptions that I'd once accepted as true. Half the fun is discovering how so, and the other half is encouraging the ideal assumptions, if applicable, to transform myself as others mirror the change that I made inside. Anyone outside of my current five-sensory experience exists in my imaginative relationship with them, as in how I am imagining them when they pop up in mind, or if I choose to imagine them, is how they show up when they do within my five-sensory experience to reflect the acceptance of the self-suggestion of how I imagine them to be. So how we make use of the wonderful gift of imagination by what we think feelingly upon in regards to them is what we are selecting from what already exists in the field of infinite imaginal possibilities of how we could experience them. Upon accepting the self-suggestions, the subconscious, which is beyond trying to figure it out, reveals it as they show up that way. So we let it happen, walking by faith rather than trying to make it happen. Now, I've tracked this over the years by applying what he shared here, and I verified it. I recommend doing this as well, as it deepens the self-persuasion of what's being discussed here. For one may believe what appears outside, or more accurately put, persistently associating undesirable assumptions from past ways of being to the outside experience more than from the reality of what they had consciously selected inside with intention and accepted as true, knowing that this is what shall be expressed as the experiences with others. Again, beyond persistent doubt identification from past relations. Now, any wavering of the great law is a lot of times a result of not trusting that we have already accepted it as done and that everything is rearranging for us now by divine will. So we apply discernment to look beyond the seeming evidence of the senses, which may present what had once been accepted as true based on, let's say, past interpretations, to further acknowledge how we would like to experience others in our experience. Thus, you have full power to create the kind of relationships you want and how others show up, consciousness outpictured as experiences with others. You see, consciousness is non-divisional, and all our rearrangements of the same mind, as he states. Consciousness is one, manifesting in legions of forms or levels of consciousness. There's no one that is not all that is, for consciousness, although expressed in an infinite series of levels, is not divisional. There is no real separation or gap in consciousness. I am cannot be divided. So what do you say of the I am within you? We're taught that whatever we accept as true about others subconsciously is how they show up and how we show up to observe as relationships in the theater of life. I found that to be the case with even the most persistent assumptions they once reflected. And so we let this world's reflections be and walk by faith from our reality inside, as the world's reflection rearranges some way, somehow, to reflect what we accepted as true. So we change our experiences with others by imagining how we relate with them and how they relate with us, accepting those self-suggestions, and that's how they show up. As mentioned, I've seen this in many areas of my life, even with those that I've experienced and formed conclusions of how they seem to be persistently appearing. They have changed to reflect by recalling that I am my ideal now. They are their ideal now. As he says here, I did it, I'm doing it, and I will continue to do it until what I have done is perfectly externalized within my world. Now, it's this degree of your self-persuasion, the ability to look beyond the seeming evidence of the senses. The five sensory suggestions are really our own self-suggestions in relation to the five sensory experience, and what is encouraged here is to imagine ideally, to reflect as ideal relationships in all areas of your life. As he says here, by representing others to myself and persuading myself that they are as I would like them to be, to the degree that I am self-persuaded, they will become it. So again, within the five sensory experience of now, you may see others, perhaps someone in the room where you're watching this. We can, in a moment, with self-reflection, ask ourselves the question, how do we imagine them to be, and how do we imagine they imagine us to be? And if it is not ideal, we think feelingly that they do have an ideal relationship with us and accept that suggestion. Again, going beyond the seeming evidence of the senses, if applicable, the subconscious in its infinite ways plays it out as it always did, as he says here. The conscious generates ideas and impresses these ideas on the subconscious. The subconscious receives ideas and gives form and expression to them. By this law, first conceiving an idea and then impressing the idea conceived on the subconscious, all things evolve out of consciousness. And without this sequence, there is not anything made that is made. And although the interaction in the past might not have been what we consider ideal with them, they will show up relating to us in the way we imagine them to be, for it is law. For consciousness, though expressed in an infinite series of levels, is not divisional. So let's say you're sitting down with someone, and they were to get up and leave the room, and we no longer experience them within our five sensory experience, five sensory awareness, then they are now subjective in imagination and experienced by how we imagine them till they return to our five sensory experience. So the question worth asking is, how do we imagine them when they are not around our immediate outer experience? Are we imagining them ideally? For if we choose it, they show up that way. So again, within our five sensory scope of awareness, we can observe how we imagine them and adjust accordingly. When they are not within our five sensory awareness, then they're subject to our imagination, in which how we think feelingly about them is how consciousness is represented and thus outpictured as how they show up. So we assume full responsibility inside and we release trying to control the outside. Everything plays out ideally from the inner transformation to reflect the ideal by divine will. I remember I had a person I used to work with, and this person would seem to treat me unfairly, but would seem to treat everyone else well. I was aware that there was a pattern that was playing out since childhood, where whenever I was in a work environment or school environment, there was always this one person who would act this way. So I began to reimagine them. The act of reimagining facilitates the subconscious changes in the relationship. I noticed as he started to treat me fairly then, I released identification instantly to label him this or that and reimagined him ideally, harmoniously, which he then showed up from that premise. So there's an enormous amount of power in this. As a matter of fact, it's the great power as articulated in Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So if we see something undesirable in relation to others, no need to argue, simply put off that former conversation inside, as Neville states here. The world is a magic circle of infinite possible mental transformations, for there are an infinite number of possible mental conversations. Everything is a manifestation of the mental conversations which go on in us without our being aware of them. But as civilized beings, we must become aware of them and act with a purpose. So it is encouraged then to act inside with purpose, for the changes that happen inside compels all outer changes. It is what you do inside that counts. Now, it's actually always been this way. Only now we are further encouraging that it is this way, to consciously act with purpose inside. So from the infinite possible mental conversations, we choose the one we love and observe how it plays out. So it's important then to think feelingly of our ideal in relation with others when they are not around. If they show up in our mind for whatever the reason, we think of them as we would like to experience them, and they show up that way. One of the ways I was doing this to facilitate a harmonious environment is whenever someone popped up in my mind, I said, they are ideal inside. Whenever I see others, I say to myself, they are ideal. Then I started saying ideal whenever I saw someone. And eventually it became automatic to when I see a person, it automatically invokes a feeling of ideal. And the tangible experiences were profound. It seems that everywhere I went, others were playing out in some shape or form interactions that I would consider to be ideal as pleasant surprises. Again, this is not new to us. We were always imagining people. When we look at them, or if they pop up in mind, we may have assigned labels that we would not have consciously assigned if we knew that each time we were applying the creative power and that this is one consciousness. So now we put off that former conversation to nothing less than ideal. And if you don't know what imaginal act implies ideal for others, say ideal to yourself and go on with your life. You know what ideal means subconsciously. And you'll be pleasantly surprised as others show up reflecting what implies ideal wherever you go. It's a wonderful thing. You see, at the core, everyone is the same. We are all formless awareness, beyond labels, body, beliefs, etc. And who doesn't want another to see them ideally? Consciousness accepts the suggestion as stated in the beginning. Everyone is yourself pushed out. So when you imagine, you are influencing yourself, and it reflects accordingly. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I'm always conscious of being what is lovely and pure by acknowledging that I am already my ideal now. From this premise, all who I imagine are represented as their ideal now. All within my awareness now are ideal. Others show up ideally to reflect the inner acknowledgement that I am already my ideal now. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.